Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Today we are continuing with our pursuit to understand occupational health and safety. So, today we are going to look and focus on workplace violence and aggression. So, you think of workplace violence and aggression as very serious public health issues that affect workers' well being and productivity. And when we are at a workplace, we want to always be as productive as possible to deliver the tasks that are always on our tables, and most so we need to always be healthy, and our well-being should also never be compromised. So this violence and aggression, whenever they come in place, then they are able to affect our well-being and productivity. So what is violence? In the workplace setting, we refer we we mean violence to be physical attacks or threats of those attacks in a work related context. So it could be either physical fights, an attack on you, either by, like we are going to see, categories of the public or your co-workers or your employer. So whenever there is that physical attack or threat of that attack, then we can term that as workplace violence. Then in aggression, we are looking at those behaviors that tend to harm a worker psychologically or physically. So this aggression in most cases leads to violence, but you have to realize that for it might not be physical, it might not be that physical attack, but it's more of those psychological harms that are intended to disrupt the well-being and productivity of the worker in their workplace. So that is what we call aggression. So, like you are going to realize, uh, all all forms of violence are of course related with aggression. So every example of violence is also an aggression, but not all aggression examples will lead to violence or will be termed as violence, because aggression before can be stopped before becoming a physical attack, while in a workplace violence you have those physical attacks, or they are more intense. So you can think of violence as a more intense form of this aggression. So the impacts of these aggressive behaviors include physical injuries, whereby you could end up being injured in these encounters, either with your fellow workers or the people that are working with the organization or your employer. Then you can have mental distress, then reduced performance because of that mental distress. Uh, if you are not having a sound mind because of that aggressive behavior that has been directed to you, then you cannot perform as you have been performing. Then there is increased absenteeism due to fear of being a target of those aggressive behaviors, like you are going to see, and then increased healthcare costs that can arise from the other physical injuries. So physical violence is more of those intentional use of physical force or power that results in injury, pain, or damage to a person or property. So the physical violence is more intense than the aggression. And then psychological harm will be that intentional or unintentional act or exclusion from anything, an activity that can adversely affect a person's mental or emotional well-being, and such acts that can be of psychological harm include humiliation, intimidation, uh, and isolation. So whenever a worker is subjected to such acts, then they will end up getting psychological harm. So we continue to define some of the things that we are going to meet as we explore this topic of aggression and violence in the workplace. So we have bullying, which is the repeated and persistent negative action that is targeted at one or more. So those negative actions and and that are repeated by either your coworker or your or your employer is what we are calling bullying. Can even be caused by clients of that organization or people who are not even clients but come there. So those repeated and persistent negative actions toward one or more individuals that create a hostile work environment are what we call bullying. Like you don't feel like being in that workplace anymore. It becomes more hostile for you because of those negative actions that are being directed onto you. They could be either insults, it could be intimidation by someone making you to arouse fear in you. You know, those negative actions are the ones that we call bullying. Then mobbing is a collective and systematic harassment of could be one person, but for it is caused by a group of perpetrators. So there are many people that are causing this harassment. And then emotional abuse refers to that deliberate manipulation of the person's emotion to cause distress or harm. So it's more of the other psychological harm that we looked at. So a person plans to cause distress in you or disrupt your mental functioning, and whenever they do that, they are doing what we call emotional abuse. Then workplace incivility is that low intensity, rude or disrespectful behaviors that violate norms of mutual respect. So anything that causes that violation of mutual respect, because we expect in any organization or any workplace to always have that sense of mutual respect where everyone respects the other, but whenever there is that loss of mutual respect, someone criticizes you over nothing, uh, insults you, so all those kinds of behavior, what we call workplace incivility, the ones that violate that feeling of mutual respect. So, a more diving into workplace bullying, we discover that workplace bullying, like we said, is that persistent pattern of mistreating others in the workplace that can cause physical or emotional harm. And it can include verbal or non-verbal, psychological and physical abuse, and humiliation tactics. So, creating that hostile environment for a person that can either lead to their emotional or physical harm is what we call bullying. And it can either be verbal or non-verbal, can be of a psychological uh, uh, aspect, and then it can also be physical. Because if you keep on insulting someone, if you keep on hurling a lot of threats to someone, then it will amount to this workplace bullying. So the consequences of this workplace bullying can be reduced self-esteem in the person who has been bullied. Confidence and motivation are also lost. Then we have increased stress, anxiety, depression, and a feeling of less motivation, or that we are calling burnout. You do not you feel like you're emotionally exhausted. You're tired of being there in that workplace. Then impaired physical health. Yeah, sometimes this distress and anxiety and depression can impair your physical health. You end up getting psychosomatic disorders, all those disorders that can they originate from your mental health well-being and affect your physical health. Yeah, for example, if you get hypertension because of the other mental health, then those are what we are calling those psychosomatic disorders. So these can all originate from that workplace bullying, and then we have that feeling of not satisfied by your job because of that bullying, and that will lead to lowered performance. Then sometimes employees who are subjected to this bullying end up leaving the company, and we have termed that as higher turnover. But those who do not leave always absent themselves from work because they do not want to face those bullies over and over. Then damaged organizational reputation and culture. An organization that is known to have those bullies, or that is known to not take action about this bullying, is always going to have that damaged reputation and culture. So how can we prevent such instances of bullying so as to create a very conducive workplace in which everyone can have a good well-being and achieve their top productivity? We can establish clear policies at workplace level and procedures that define and prohibit bullying behavior. So these ones should be clear. They should be understandable, and it should spell out what constitutes of this bullying behavior, and then they should also put in place. They should also stipulate what does not constitute of this bullying behavior. Then also we should provide regular training and education on how to recognize and report bullying incidents. Workers or these employees in any organization or any workplace should be aware of what bullying is, how to report it, and the consequences of bullying. So this is done and it is achieved through that regular training and education. Then we also need to encourage open communication and feedback among employees and managers so that this reporting uh, can be done easily, can be done freely without fear of any negative consequence from those bullies. So this is why we should encourage that open communication and feedback. Then we can also implement fair and timely investigation and resolution processes for complaints about bullying. Yeah, and we are emphasizing the fact that these investigations should be fair, and we are going to realize later in this presentation that it is better for these investigations to be done by a third party who has no relationship between who has no relationship with the grieving or the two parties who were involved in this bullying. The bully and then the person who is bullied should not know this person who is going to conduct this investigation. But this investigation's outcome should also be timely. We should aim at investigating very fast and producing a resolution or resolving such acts of bullying. Then offering support and assistance to victims and those people who observe that bullying can help to lessen those problems that arise and especially affect the mental health of those people who have been bullied and those who have observed that bullying. Then, if all measures fail, these bullies should always be punished or held accountable for their actions, and they we can always impose sanctions or punishments for these bullies. So in that way, you should be able to prevent bullying by putting in place clear policies, training the employees or workers, encouraging open communication, and implementing fair and timely investigations, then offering support to prevent mental health issues that can arise from bullying, and then holding the bullies or the perpetrators of this bullying accountable, and putting in place punishments in case it is out of hand. Then the other issue that we need to talk about as far as aggression is concerned in the workplace is what we call workplace incivility. And like we had defined it earlier, it is that low intensity rude behavior that violates workplace norms of mutual respect. And it can include actions like ignoring, interrupting, or dismissing someone's opinions or contributions. So, whenever you are maybe in a meeting or you are in a brainstorming kind of session, and someone's opinions and contributions are constantly ignored, interrupted, and dismissed, this will amount to what we call workplace incivility. Yeah, it might not be a physical attack, but it will eventually lead to a lot of effects, especially mental effects that we are going to look at. Then the other action that can be classified as workplace incivility is making those sarcastic, derogatory, or disrespectful remarks or gestures. So those disrespectful remarks that are made towards people all amount to incivility. Then showing impatience, hostility, or aggression towards others is also an act of workplace incivility. Uh, Workplace incivility can also occur in the form of failing to acknowledge, appreciate, or cooperate with others. So when you fail to work in a team, or ignoring the call to work as a team in the workplace, will also be regarded as workplace incivility. And the outcomes of workplace incivility include decreased trust, engagement, and loyalty among employees. Yeah, because if someone's ideas are always dismissed, they are always criticized, they are always disrespected, then their spirit of engagement in those conversations between workmates and maybe between management and workers will be reduced. Okay, and this is not good, of course. Then increased conflict, tension, and resentment in the workplace. Yeah, so here the people who have been subjected to this incivility feel they feel so bitter about it, and this is what we are calling resentment. And then it can arise, of course, into conflict, but also it can reduce someone's creativity, innovation, and problem solving skills, because I mean, if your ideas are always bashed, they are always criticized and dismissed without any encouragement, without any good reason, then your creativity, your innovation, and problem solving skills will be reduced. Then it will also impact on someone's cognitive functioning, their memory and decision making abilities, since it targets the mental well-being of a person. And then increased psychological distress, emotional exhaustion, and depression symptoms. So these outcomes arise because of the fact that this incivility is targeting the psychological well-being of a worker. So how can we address this incivility? We must make sure that we model courteous, or those polite and considerate behavior towards others. The managers themselves, the employers, should be able to be courteous or polite whenever they are handling the subordinates or the workers, so that even the workers themselves uh, are able to copy that kind of action and behavior. Then it becomes a culture in that organization. Then we should set clear expectations and standards of civil conduct in a workplace. Everyone should know how they're supposed to behave with each other. We uh, making sure that there is mutual respect in any forum that requires engagement, and then providing constructive feedback and recognition for positive behaviors. Whenever someone does good, there should be that constructive feedback and recognition so that they can be encouraged, they can feel worth, that self-esteem is raised whenever we do give this constructive feedback. Then intervening promptly and effectively whenever incivility occurs, and then developing coping skills and resilience, especially in these in amongst the workers, so that whenever there are those instances of incivility, they are able to deal with them in in a good manner, and they are resolved without causing further harm to their psychological well-being. Then we also uh, need to interest ourselves in another act of aggression called sexual harassment. And in the workplace, when we talk about sexual harassment, we mean any unwelcome conduct of a sexual nature that interferes with an employee's work performance and creates a hostile or an intimidating work environment. So, any conduct that is not welcomed, or that that is done on a person, even even when they have not consented, or or so any act that is not welcome, or that is perceived not to be uh, good for a person, and it is in a sexual nature, and interferes with the employee's work performance, or creates a hostile and intimidating work environment, it amounts to what we call sexual harassment. And the types of sexual harassment can include quid pro quo and hostile work environment. And in quid pro quo, this is either caused by the employer or your supervisor in a workplace. And of course, like we said, it is always unwelcome, but it comes with with demands, requests in exchange for a job benefit, or to avoid a negative consequence. So when an employer or your supervisor uh, directs onto you unwelcome sexual advances in exchange for a job benefit, for example, promotion, or to avoid a negative consequence, maybe all the employees were about to be punished because of some mistake that was made, and then this particular person, either your employer or your supervisor, comes and says, in order to avoid such a punishment, we are going to engage in maybe such a sexual activity, or maybe they start doing unwelcome sexual advances and requests or demands. Then this will amount to what we call the quid pro quo sexual harassment. Then in hostile work environment, it can be from even the fellow workers, and in this case, an employee is subjected to unwelcome sexual comments, jokes, gestures, images, or physical contact that are severe and pervasive enough to alter the conditions of employment and create an abusive work environment. So it might be either by your employer or fellow worker, but the fact that it can alter the conditions of employment and create that abusive work environment, it will be enough to be termed as hostile work environment. That is also a type of sexual harassment. So This sexual harassment comes with legal implications, and it has been found to be a form of sex discrimination that violates national and international laws. So employers have that legal obligation to prevent and address sexual harassment in the workplace. So they can do this by adopting and enforcing anti-harassment policies, providing training and education about what constitutes of this sexual harassment, how to report it, and how to deal with the consequences, and then conducting prompt and thorough investigations whenever an issue about sexual harassment in the workplace is raised, and then taking appropriate corrective actions to prevent the effects of this sexual harassment. So, victims of this sexual harassment have a right to file or sue their employer in court, because we have realized that the employer is in charge of making sure that their workplace is free of this sexual harassment. So whenever that those sexual harassment cases occur, then the victims of such cases cannot have the right to sue or file a court case uh, against the employer because they have failed to do their work. Okay, so they may also seek counseling, medical care, legal assistance, or other support services from various sources whenever they are faced with these sexual harassment acts. Yeah, so of course, medical care can be either to address their physical health or their mental health, then legal assistance so that the perpetrators are brought to book, and then other services either to support their, especially those that support their mental health well-being. So aggression in general is prevalent in workplaces, and it occurs in various workplaces or in most workplaces. And as we said, it is any behavior that harms or intends to harm a person at work, such as physical violence, verbal abuse, bullying, intimidation, or sabotage. So, research on prevalence of workplace aggression has shown that it is widespread and costly, and affects millions of workers worldwide. So, these cases of workplace aggression tend to vary depending on definition, how aggression in a workplace is defined in in particular in different countries, and then measurement of this workplace aggression, and then the data that is the data source that we are getting our information from. But we realize that the general trends that are observed across most industries, sectors, and countries are that those people who work in higher levels of customer contact, for example, those who work in the health sector, in the retail sector, hospitality, and education, tend to report get higher rates of workplace aggression. So these people who are always in contact with their clients, the customers, like those in hospitals, those in retail shops, those in hospitality, or those in hotels, those in the education sector, who are always also uh, in contact with their customers, and in this case, we are talking about the students. They tend to report higher rates of workplace aggression. Then also, people with higher levels of organizational stress, like the ones in public administration, law enforcement, and social services, also tend to experience higher rates of workplace aggression. Can think of these as people as to consist like those people who work in police, those people who work in law enforcement jobs, like the lawyers, the judges. So these people are always targets of this workplace aggression. Yeah. Then also countries with lower levels of economic development, social welfare, and human rights protection tend to have higher rates of workplace aggression, because you can realize that when there are no human rights protection uh, measures, then people will engage in this workplace aggression, knowing that they can get away with it. Then the fact that also those countries with lower economic development are listed here means that these countries where people are poor and tend to resort to adverse ways of looking for money, then they can end up doing things like robbery in the workplace, and then it also uh, brings about that workplace aggression that we are talking about. So factors that can contribute to workplace aggression include the job characteristics, such as high workload, low autonomy, role ambiguity, so all role conflict and lack of feedback. So all these can always lead to workplace aggression. Whenever you have high workload, it could lead to it could lead to low motivation at that workplace. It could lead to also being emotionally volatile, and this will result into workplace aggression if it is not dealt with very well. Then, when we talk about lack of feedback here, we are looking at, at, at those cases whereby employees or workers expect feedback or uh, expect to be communicated to. So whenever there is that lack of communication or that lack of feedback, then there can be these acts of aggression. Yeah, for example, if employees need their salaries and then they are not communicated to, it could lead to acts of workplace aggression. Then organizational structures, poor leadership that does not uh, communicate politely, does not communicate in time, does not implement good welfare policies, unfair policies, low morale, and lack of support can also be a factor that contributes to workplace aggression. Then we also have individual characteristics. Yeah, there are those people who are naturally rude. They naturally have those volatile characteristics, such that with a simple even with a simple mistake, they can they can they can cause this workplace aggression. Then also someone's attitude at the workplace, their emotions and coping styles can also be a factor that contributes to workplace aggression. So investigation of workplace harassment can take on the following steps, and this is always guided by workplace harassment, which should include provision for investigating and resolving specific incidents. So, recommended investigation policies that can be used include provision for individuals to file a complaint. There should be that provision for an individual who feels that they have been harassed at the workplace to file a complaint, you know, and this should be in a way that does not put them in harm's way. Okay, so whenever they are going to file this complaint, they should feel free and they should be confident that their problem is going to be worked on. And then the conduct of an investigation by a neutral third party as soon as possible after the complaint has been filed. Like I said, it is important for this investigation to be done by a neutral third party who will not be biased by either the perpetrator or the victim. Okay. Then consultation with each of the parties, the perpetrator and the victim of this harassment in the workplace, evidence getting and decision making. Then we have communicating the decision to the parties with a proposed resolution, and then documenting the process or maintaining records so that they can always be revisited whenever similar cases of harassment occur, to see how they were resolved and maybe guide on resolving those future harassment cases. So we also should note that such investigation procedures should accommodate a possibility of appeals. It should not be one way, that when a victim lodges in a complaint, then they are the ones who are going to be favored. No, even the fact that even after making your a judgment and maybe resolving uh, these harassment cases, the aggrieved party of that judgment should be able to appeal. There should be a provision for them to appeal. So, investigating incidents of workplace harassment should be guided by policies that typically include these steps that we have said. Provide individuals. It should the first the first step that should be encouraged is a provision for individuals to file a complaint. Should be done without the individual feeling intimidated, or without them feeling that they will be harmed after filing this complaint. And then there should be conduct an investigation that is conducted by a neutral third party. Should be consultation with each of the parties that are involved, the aggrieved and the perpetrator, and then we should always have evidence gathering that is thorough, and then decision making that is very fair, and then should communicate the decision to the perpetrator and the victim, and also what you have resolved to go with, and then you document the process so that it can be revisited in case a similar harassment case occurs. Act as a guide. Yeah, so that was harassment or aggression. Now we look at workplace violence in detail. So violence is an actual physical assault or a threat of that assault. And all behaviors, like we said, all violent behaviors by definition are aggressive, whereas not all aggressive behaviors are violent. Yeah, so that is something that we need to take note of. Everything that is violent is aggressive, but not everything that is aggressive can be violent. So you can think of violence as that intense or that severe form of this aggression. Okay, yeah, and we are going to look at some of the examples. So workplace violence can be categorized on the relationship based on the relationship between the person who causes the violence and the victim, okay, as well as the context and setting of the violence. So there are basically four main types of violence in a workplace, and they have been named as type 1, type 2 through to type 4. So type 1, like we said, categorizing this violence is based on the relationship between the assailant or the person who causes the violence or the perpetrator, and then the person who has suffered the violence. So in type 1, we look at violence that is by individuals that have no legitimate relationship to the organization. So in type 1, we are talking about that violence or that physical assault or that physical attack that is caused by individuals that have no legitimate relationship with the organization in which this violence has taken place. So it includes examples like robbery, burglary, trespassing, vandalism of property, terrorism, you know, and it can be caused because these people want monetary gain, ideological or political agenda, yeah, and then personal grudges, and sometimes the perpetrators or these people who are causing violence could have mental illnesses. So this type 1 violence is characterized by the fact that it is unpredictable, it is random, and often involves weapons or threats. Yeah, because sometimes, like robbery, will involve use of weapons to scare and threaten the people who might come in the way of these robbers. So the impacts of type 1 violence include physical injury, property damage, since we said it also includes burglary, and then psychological trauma due to that facing of that intense violence, and then fear and loss of trust. Yeah. Then prevention interventions should focus on security measures or increasing the security in that organization, and emergency protocols so as to deal with the consequences of this type 1 violence, situation analysis to understand what could cause the risk factors of that could lead to this violence. You should know those dark spots which do not have proper lighting. Uh, there are places which are not covered by the camera. So all this is in situation awareness, and it could help in preventing such acts of type 1 violence. Then we also have reporting suspicious activities, those people who come around, who pass by, or who are always suspicious in a way. They carry bags around that organization over and over. They watch around to see if the cameras are working. So those suspicious activities should also be watched out for, so that we prevent type 1 violence in the workplaces. So we say type 1 is between those people who do not have a legitimate relationship with the organization, and then in type 2 violence, it is that is caused by clients or customers. So these ones, of course, have that legitimate relationship with the organization. Okay, so they could be clients or customers, and it takes on forms like assault, verbal abuse, harassment by those customers, intimidation by patients if you are in the healthcare workplaces, then can also be by students or customers. So it could be caused by dissatisfaction by that customer, by a student or a patient, anyone who is a client to the organization that has experienced this type 2 violence, and then frustration, anger, entitlement, and impairment can also lead to this type 3 violence. So it is characterized by the fact that it is reactive, or it is as a result of a reaction towards maybe that dissatisfaction, frustration, anger, and it can it can also be impulsive, yeah, whereby we mean that these clients do not think through before they act, and then it often involves verbal or physical confrontation. So the impacts of this type 2 could be physical injury, emotional distress, burnout, uh, and sometimes leaving the organization, and reduced quality of service due to this violence. So, of course, when you face harassment, when you face intimidation by a customer, then you will not deliver the same quality of service that you have always been delivering. Then the prevention strategies for this type 2 violence include communication skills. You should learn how to communicate with these customers so that you don't reach that point of engaging in this type 2 violence or triggering this type 2 violence. Then de-escalation techniques. You should know whenever to politely talk to this person whose anger has risen. So if a person is very angry, you should also not be angry as a person working on this client. If a client is angry, you who is working on them shouldn't also be angry, but you should know how to politely or calm these people down so that you do not end up with type 2 violence. So that is what we call de-escalation techniques. Then conflict resolution is also very important in preventing this, and customer service training. So type 1, we said, is related to those people who are not in any way having a legitimate relationship with the organization. In type 2, we said it is between the clients or the customers and a worker. And then in type 3, we are looking at violence by co-workers. So examples include bullying, stalking, sabotage, retaliation, or and by current or former employees. So you could have engaged in in uh, in a dispute, and then this ended into someone being fired or they left the organization. So when they come back, they are also considered as co-workers in that case. And if they cause violence, it could also be categorized as type 3 violence, and that's what we are calling retaliation by former employees. Then it can arise due to competition, in the workplace, jealousy, envy, resentment, and then revenge. So all these can be motivators of type 3 violence. So it is characterized by the fact that it is relational, it is cumulative, or it arises due to after a series of events, and then it also often involves power imbalance or group dynamics. Yeah, so that violence that can arise from maybe a supervisor and a subordinate, a team leader and then the team member, is what we call type 3 violence. Then the impacts of this could include physical injury, because we said violence is always sometimes physical or a threat to be physical. Then it can also lead to emotional distress, can also lead to isolation, low morale or gusto to work, and then decreased productivity. So prevention strategies uh, include organizational structure, whereby we should always respect each other, and then we should also have policies and procedures to prevent workers from engaging in these acts of violence against each other. Then performance management to prevent these motivators like competition, jealousy, envy, So in performance management, you want to encourage each and every worker so that they do not have to reach at that point of jealousy and envy. Everyone should be acknowledged because of what they are doing in their own way. Then employee assistance programs, especially for those who are victims of this violence. Then in type 4, we we are looking at the violence that is caused by the spouse or a partner of a particular worker. Okay, so if it is violence between a worker and their spouse, either in that workplace or outside, but in most cases it is always outside the workplace. So the violence that is caused by a partner of the victim is what we call type 4. So we said type 1 is between the worker and someone who is not having a legitimate relationship with the organization, the thieves or terrorists. Then in type 2 it is between the customer and then the worker. Type 3 is between or amongst the workers. And then in type 4 we are looking at a spouse or a partner of a worker violating or causing this violence. So examples include domestic violence, sexual assault, sometimes these homicides by current or former intimate partners. So a homicide is like murder, and then the motivators or the causes could be due to that feeling of domination, obsession, possessiveness, and then wanting to control someone. Yeah. So sometimes a worker could be in a very demanding job which requires them to stay out for long and then come back home late, and this spouse could relate that to maybe unfaithfulness, and lack of care, and could end up violating their spouse. So when they do that, it's what we call type 4 violence. So it is characterized by the fact that it is coercive, manipulative, and often involves isolation or stalking. So, for us to prevent it, we need to make sure that these workers are aware and educated about this type 4 violence. There are support and resources. There is support and resources for those who fall victim for this violence, and then there should also be safety planning and legal protection. Then the other type of violence that we have is picket line violence, which refers to the use of physical force or intimidation by workers or employers during a labor dispute such as a strike or lockout. Yeah, so the picket line that we are looking at here is that, like, that boundary between uh, employees and the employer that can be put whenever there is a strike, so that they prevent maybe access by either if it is put by the employer, then they do not want the employees to cross it to access the premises of that organization. But if it is put by the employees, then they have locked out their employer because of maybe a grievance that they could be having in that workplace. So examples include assaulting or threatening workers who cross the picket line. So if it is by the employer, if they beat or assault the employees that have crossed that line or have accessed maybe the premises of that organization, even when they have stopped them from doing that, then it will amount to picket line violence. Then damaging or sabotaging the property or equipment of the employer or the workers is also picket line violence. Blocking and obstructing the entrance, like we said, is also picket line violence. Then when the workers throw objects or projectiles, stones towards uh, towards towards the glasses of the employer's building, or when these objects or projectiles, tear gas, is thrown onto workers who are engaging in a strike. It is also termed as picket line violence. So also using these weapons that can harm or intimidate workers whenever they are engaging in maybe a strike against their management or their employer is also called picket line violence. So it can be classified into two. One can be confrontational, the other is purposeful. So in confrontational, it might not be planned per se, but it is as a result of emotions running high, tempers flaring, leading to that spontaneous and unplanned act of aggression. Okay, so whenever there is you can think of this as whenever there is you are in an organization, then a manager or the employer uh, abuses another an, another a worker. So in that moment when those tempers flare and then emotions run high, and maybe there is an act of assault, then we shall call that confrontational violence. But purposeful violence is when one party deliberately plans and executes a violent act. So this one is a stepwise kind of thing. It takes a bit of more time than the confrontational. So when workers have been aggrieved about something, maybe low payment or delay of salaries in an organization, then they plan to lock out their employer from accessing the premises of this organization. So if it is planned for for a good time, then it will amount to what we call purposeful violence. So such they include disrupting the operations of the employer or the workers. So the implications of this picket line violence include the risk of injury, death, trauma, and legal liability to the parties involved. Yeah, because there is distraction. Sometimes the people who are involved end up facing the iron hand of the law. Then escalating the tensions and hostility between the workers and the employer, making it hard to reach a peaceful and mutually beneficial agreement. Yeah, so sometimes the employer would want to dialogue with these workers about maybe their grievances, but whenever there is this picket line violence of maybe workers throwing stones at the building of this employer or locking them out of their premises, then it can escalate this tension and prevent this peaceful and mutually beneficial agreement. So the implications is that uh, the other implications are that damages the reputation and public image of the workers or the employer, affecting their credibility and legitimacy, and then it undermines the rights and freedoms of workers to organize and bargain collectively, and of the employer to operate and manage the business. So it depends on who is facing the violence. If it is the workers, they are being targeted by tear gas, it of course undermines their rights and freedoms to bargain collectively. But if the employer is locked out of their premises by the workers, then it will disrupt their operations and their management of the business. Yeah, so for us to understand the risk of violence, we can always use this SAVT, the one that has this acronym has been suggested as a way of understanding the specific risks that are associated with situations or occupations. So SAVT is an acronym that stands for scheduling, authority, valuables, and taking care of others. So we are looking at which people are at are at a greater risk of facing violence in a workplace. And in scheduling, we look at individuals who work alone, or those people who work on weekends, and those who work at night. So those are at an increased risk of violence. The ones who have more authority or can make or supervise people, or those who are in a position to deny services, or those who make decisions that can influence people's lives, like those human resource officers who might sometimes have the who might have the ability to fire employees. They can be at a greater risk of being violated by those people who they have fired. Okay, then those people who work around valuable products, either money or those valuables like prescription medications, alcohol, weapons, they are also at an increased risk of violence. Then those who take care of others, especially outside the traditional workplace, for example, those who deliver home-based services like physiotherapy, they are also at increased risk of violence and aggression. Okay, then we need to finally look at robbery in the workplace. So, like we said, robbery is always that act that can be that can be caused by these robbers, and they always target people who handle cash, valuables, and prescription drugs. And robbery related homicides can have devastating effects on the survival of workers. You can also end up having post traumatic stress disorder, but also depression and reduced productivity. So, for us to prevent robbery, we need to conduct risk assessment to see those people or those areas that are at greater risk of facing these robberies. We can also install physical barriers, you know, those that shield the people who are at higher risk of facing these robberies from maybe the clients or the robbers, and then establishing policies and procedures to handle cash, valuables, and prescription drugs. You've seen those armored vehicles which carry cars, so that, and they do not do that because of anything else but to protect the people who are handling cash and the cash them itself from being robbed by these malicious people. Then providing regular training and education for workers on how to prevent robbery and cope with those situations, then developing a crisis management plan so that uh, you can always handle such devastating effects of robberies, and offering support services for workers after a robbery incident to prevent those effects that can occur in them. So, as you can realize, aggression and violence are very, very vital topics that are in occupational health, and we need to understand how we can identify and classify the the components of aggression and violence. We need to know and also educate the workers on their rights and make them feel free to always report these cases. But when they are reported, they should be promptly handled, and and fair decisions made. And then, if need be, the perpetrators need to always be brought to book. And when we do that, we shall achieve better productivity and especially better mental health well-being for the workers, and have a peaceful and productive workplace. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I wish you a productive day.